The air in the Grand Market was thick with the scent of spices, roasted nuts, and exhaust fumes from the nearby street. It was a chaotic symphony of vendors hawking their wares, the chatter of 1,000 conversations, and the occasional blare of a horn. Amidst this vibrant, often unforgiving cacophony, stood IBRAHIM TRAORÉ. His small stall, neatly arranged with vibrant textiles and intricately carved wooden figures, was a splash of color against the weathered brick of the market wall. IBRAHIM wasn't loud like some of the other vendors. He didn't yell or sing. He stood quietly behind his table, his hands, strong, calloused hands that spoke of a life of work, gently straightening a display or wiping away dust that dared settle on his precious goods. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, observed the passing crowd with a mixture of hope and weary understanding. Each piece he sold, each interaction he had, was a small step towards a larger dream, a dream of providing a better life for his family, of bringing them closer, of building something stable and good in this new, sometimes bewildering land. He worked long hours, arriving before the sun painted the sky and staying until the market lights flickered on, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts. It wasn't easy. There were days when the cold bit deep, or the rain chased customers away. Days when the loneliness felt like a physical weight in his chest. Days when the subtle glances or dismissive waves of a hand reminded him that he was seen as an outsider, a stranger in a place that was slowly, painstakingly, becoming his home. But IBRAHIM held onto his dignity like a shield. He treated every potential customer with respect, offered fair prices, and poured his heart into the quality of his goods, many of which he crafted himself or sourced from artisans he trusted implicitly. This particular afternoon was like many others. The market was busy, the flow of people steady. A group of tourists lingered at a nearby stall, their laughter echoing. A regular customer, Mrs. Diaz, a kind elderly woman, stopped to admire a scarf, her smile warming IBRAHIM more than any fleeting ray of sun. He felt a sense of quiet contentment, the simple satisfaction of a day's honest work unfolding. Then, he saw him. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson was a man who seemed to carry the weight of his own importance like a heavy cloak. He frequented the market, but rarely bought anything from the stalls like IBRAHIM's. He preferred the established shops on the high street. When he did venture into the market, it was often with an air of disdain, as if the very ground beneath his expensive shoes was slightly soiled. Today, he wasn't alone. He was with another man, equally well-dressed and with a similar air of entitled impatience. They were browsing, or rather, peering critically, at the stall next to IBRAHIM's, which sold inexpensive jewelry. IBRAHIM tried not to pay them any mind, focusing on folding a large, vibrant piece of fabric. But their voices, loud and carrying easily over the market din, started to draw his attention. They were complaining about the quality of the jewelry, using dismissive tones that made the young woman running the stall shrink back slightly. IBRAHIM felt a familiar knot tighten in his stomach. He knew that tone. It was the tone of someone who saw themselves as superior, someone who felt they had the right to belittle others. Mr. Henderson and his companion moved on, their eyes scanning the other stalls. As they approached IBRAHIM's, Mr. Henderson paused, his gaze sweeping over the textiles and carvings with a look of obvious disinterest, bordering on contempt. "Look at this, Peter," Mr. Henderson said, not to IBRAHIM, but to his friend, loud enough for several nearby people to hear. "More, ethnic trinkets. Imported dust collectors, I expect." IBRAHIM felt a prick of heat rise in his cheeks, but he kept his expression neutral, his hands steady on the fabric. He had learned long ago that engaging with such casual dismissal rarely led anywhere good. Peter chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Probably overpriced junk. You wonder where they even get this stuff. Or how clean it is." This was a step further. It wasn't just dismissive of the goods, it was a veiled insult towards IBRAHIM himself, implying a lack of cleanliness or legitimacy in his trade. IBRAHIM's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He took a slow, steadying breath. Mr. Henderson then turned his attention directly to IBRAHIM, though his eyes still held that distant, critical look. "Tell me," he said, his voice dripping with feigned curiosity, "do people actually buy this? This colorful fabric? Who would want this?" The insult hung in the air, stark and undeniable. It wasn't just about the fabric, it was about Ibrahim, his background, his livelihood, his presence in this market, in this country. It was a public challenge to his right to be there, to earn a living. Several people nearby had fallen silent, their eyes flicking between Mr. Henderson and Ibrahim. The usual market noise seemed to recede, replaced by a sudden, awkward quietness. A woman buying vegetables a few feet away paused, a carrot halfway to her bag. The young jewelry vendor from the next stall watched with wide, worried eyes. They were all waiting. Waiting to see what Ibrahim would do. Would he flare up in anger, shouting back? Would he shrink away, defeated and humiliated? Would he try to argue, to defend his goods, his dignity? The air crackled with anticipation, the collective breath of onlookers held tight. Ibrahim stood perfectly still for a long moment. The insult echoed in his ears, sharp and intended to wound. He felt the familiar surge of emotions, the sting of injustice, the frustration of being judged, the exhaustion of facing prejudice. His hands, still resting on the fabric, clenched into fists, the knuckles turning white for just a second before he consciously relaxed them. He looked at Mr. Henderson, really looked at him, past the expensive clothes and the sneering expression, into the eyes that held a strange mix of arrogance and perhaps, a flicker of something else, a need to feel superior. The silence stretched, becoming heavy. Mr. Henderson seemed to swell slightly, puffing out his chest, perhaps expecting a reaction, an apology, a fumbled explanation, maybe even an angry outburst he could then use to justify his contempt. Peter stood beside him, a smirk playing on his lips. The crowd watched, their faces a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and sympathy. Some seemed ready to look away, embarrassed. Others were riveted, morbidly curious. What would the outsider do when confronted so directly, so publicly? Ibrahim took another slow breath, the sense of the market filling his lungs. He felt the weight of the expectations, the silent pressure from the onlookers, the aggressive energy radiating from Mr. Henderson. He could choose anger. He could choose despair. Both would be understandable, expected reactions. But in that moment, standing there with the eyes of the market upon him, Ibrahim made a different choice. A choice that came from deep within him, from the resilience forged by years of hardship, from the quiet strength of his spirit. A choice that no one, especially not Mr. Henderson, expected. He didn't lower his gaze. He didn't falter. A calm, almost serene expression began to settle upon his face, slowly replacing the flicker of pain. It was a quiet transformation, subtle but profound, like the moment before sunrise when the first hint of light appears on the horizon. The onlookers noticed the change, their expressions shifting from anticipation to confusion. Mr. Henderson's smirk wavered slightly. Ibrahim then did the last thing anyone anticipated. He didn't speak in anger. He didn't argue. He didn't defend. He simply did this. He smiled. It wasn't a forced smile, or a nervous one. It was a genuine, gentle smile that reached his eyes, softening the weary lines etched around them. It was a smile that held no trace of malice, no hint of fear, only a profound, quiet dignity. He didn't just smile, he then extended his hand, not towards Mr. Henderson, but towards the vibrant fabric he had been folding. His movements were deliberate, graceful. He picked up the piece of fabric, a large shawl woven with threads of gold, crimson, and deep indigo, depicting intricate patterns that told silent stories. He held it up, letting it unfold slowly, revealing its full beauty. "This," Ibrahim said, his voice soft yet clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a single, pure note, "is not just colorful fabric." He didn't raise his voice, didn't sound defensive or explanatory. He simply stated a fact, with the quiet conviction of someone who knew the truth of what he was saying. He didn't look at Mr. Henderson as he spoke these initial words. His gaze was on the fabric, as if admiring an old friend. Each thread holds a history, he continued, his voice flowing with a quiet passion that was utterly unexpected from the usually reserved vendor. Woven by hands that learned the craft from their grandmothers, who learned from theirs. For generations. The dyes come from plants and roots gathered under specific moons, holding the colors of our earth, our sky. He gently smoothed a section of the shawl, his fingers tracing the patterns. This pattern here, he said, pointing to a complex design of interlocking shapes, it tells the story of migration. Of leaving home, of facing challenges, of finding strength in community and hope in a new place. His voice held a subtle depth now, a resonance that spoke of personal experience without explicitly stating it. Mr. Henderson and Peter watched, their expressions shifting from smugness to bewildered silence. The onlookers leaned in, captivated. The jewelry vendor next door seemed to forget her own troubles, her mouth slightly open. This wasn't the reaction anyone had prepared for. They expected anger, tears, a loud argument. They got poetry. Ibrahim finally looked up, his gaze meeting Mr. Henderson's directly. His eyes were calm, steady, and held a remarkable depth. There was no challenge in them, no anger, just a quiet, understanding presence. You ask who would want this? Ibrahim continued, his smile returning, even softer this time. Someone who appreciates the time, the skill, the soul woven into it. Someone who sees not just fabric, but a piece of a story, a connection to a culture, a window into a world different from their own. He paused, holding the shawl up higher. It shimmered in the afternoon light, a silent testament to its own beauty and the effort behind its creation. It is a piece of resilience, he said quietly, a piece of hope. It carries the warmth of the sun under which the cotton grew, the scent of the earth from which the dyes were drawn, the echoes of the laughter and songs sung while the looms worked. He then looked out at the wider crowd that had gathered. His gaze swept over their faces, acknowledging their presence, their curiosity. In my country, he said, his voice gaining a touch more volume, carrying across the market, these patterns, these colors, they are more than decoration. They are language. They tell stories. They celebrate life, mourn loss, mark journeys. When a woman wraps herself in such a shawl, she carries her history with her, a shield of beauty and meaning. He turned back to Mr. Henderson and Peter. Perhaps, he said gently, his tone completely free of sarcasm or challenge, it is not for everyone. And that is perfectly all right. Just as different people appreciate different kinds of art, different kinds of music, different kinds of stories. He slowly folded the shawl again, handling it with the reverence one would give a precious relic. His movements were slow, deliberate, allowing everyone to witness the care he took. But to call it dust collectors. Ibrahim paused, not in anger, but with a faint sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a long journey. He looked down at the folded fabric for a moment, then back up at Mr. Henderson, his expression one of gentle understanding, almost pity. That suggests a lack of imagination, perhaps? Or maybe, he added, his voice quieter now, intended perhaps just for Mr. Henderson, though still audible to those nearby, a fear of anything that does not fit neatly into one's own world. The impact of his words, delivered with such grace and absence of malice, was palpable. Mr. Henderson seemed to visibly shrink, his chest deflating slightly. The arrogant smirk had completely vanished from Peter's face, replaced by a look of stunned silence. The onlookers, who had expected a confrontation, were witnessing something entirely different. They were seeing a man publicly insulted, who had chosen not to fight fire with fire, but to respond with light, with beauty, with a quiet assertion of the value of his work and his heritage. It was disarming. It was powerful. Ibrahim placed the folded shawl back on the table. He didn't gloat, didn't press his advantage. He simply stood there, behind his stall, radiating a quiet strength that was far more imposing than any shouted argument could ever be. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. He glanced at Peter, who offered no help. He looked at the ground, then back at Ibrahim, who simply stood, his eyes calm and steady. The silence that followed Ibrahim's words was different from the silence that had preceded them. It wasn't an awkward, tense silence of anticipation. It was a thoughtful silence, filled with the echoes of Ibrahim's unexpected eloquence and the collective processing of what had just happened. People in the crowd began to stir, looking at each other. A few nodded slowly, their expressions now clearly sympathetic towards Ibrahim and critical of Mr. Henderson. The vegetable vendor resumed bagging her carrot, but her eyes kept darting back to Ibrahim's stall, a new look of respect in them. Mr. Henderson mumbled something inaudible to Peter, who just shrugged awkwardly. They both seemed eager to escape the sudden spotlight Ibrahim's response had placed on them. The arrogance had been stripped away, replaced by a visible discomfort. Ibrahim didn't pursue them. He didn't demand an apology. He simply stood there, his dignity intact, his quiet strength having won a far greater victory than any argument could have achieved. As Mr. Henderson and Peter awkwardly shuffled away, practically hurrying now through the crowd, a ripple of quiet murmuring spread through the market. People were talking about what they had just witnessed. Not about the insult, but about the response. About Ibrahim. A young woman, who had been watching from a few feet away, stepped forward hesitantly. She wasn't a tourist, she looked like a local student. She approached Ibrahim's stall slowly, her eyes fixed on the textiles. Ibrahim turned to her, offering the same gentle smile he had given moments before. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice a little shy. "That shawl, the one with the story of the journey." Ibrahim nodded, understanding immediately. He reached for the folded shawl, his hands moving with the same care as before. He held it out to her. She reached out and gently touched the fabric, her fingers tracing the pattern he had described. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Truly beautiful." She looked up at Ibrahim, her eyes filled with genuine admiration. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "Thank you for explaining. I never saw them like this before." This was the beginning of something new. The insult, intended to diminish and isolate, had, through Ibrahim's extraordinary response, become something else entirely. It had become a moment of connection, of understanding, of unexpected light in the often harsh world of the market. Ibrahim simply smiled, a deep satisfaction settling in his heart. His quiet response hadn't just shocked everyone, it had opened hearts and changed perspectives. The true value of his goods, and more importantly, the true strength of his spirit, had been revealed not through words of anger, but through words of beauty, history, and quiet resilience. The market noise began to build again, but something had fundamentally shifted in the air around Ibrahim's stall. People were looking at him differently now. Not as just another vendor, but as a man who carried stories, history, and a remarkable inner peace. The air around Ibrahim's stall seemed to hum with a different energy after Mr. Henderson and Peter retreated. It wasn't just the usual market buzz, there was a palpable sense of lingering surprise, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected power of a calm response. People didn't immediately rush to his stall, but the way they looked at him had changed. The casual indifference or polite avoidance was gone, replaced by open curiosity and a visible measure of respect. The young woman, Anya, stood before his table, her fingers gently stroking the vibrant fabric of the shawl Ibrahim had held up. She wasn't just looking at the colors and patterns, she seemed to be truly seeing them, her expression thoughtful, almost reverent. "The story of the journey," she repeated softly, looking at the pattern. "My grandmother, she came here a long time ago. From another country. She always said her life was a long road, full of unexpected turns." She paused, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She didn't have a beautiful shawl like this to remind her of where she came from. Only her memories. Ibrahim listened quietly, his gaze kind. He understood the unspoken ache in her words, the connection to heritage, the feeling of being separated from roots. It was a feeling he knew well. Memories are strong, he said gently. They are also a kind of thread, weaving our past to our present. He carefully picked up another piece, a smaller scarf in deep blues and greens, adorned with geometric patterns. Some patterns, he explained, showing it to her, are like maps. Not of places you can find on paper, but maps of the heart, of family ties, of the journey inward. Anya looked from the scarf to Ibrahim, a new sense of wonder in her eyes. You see so much in them, she murmured. Because they hold so much, Ibrahim replied simply. Each knot, each dye, each motif, it is a whisper from the past, a hope for the future, a celebration of the present moment. He smiled. Or, if you prefer, just a beautiful scarf. Anya smiled back, a genuine, bright smile. No, she said firmly. Not just a beautiful scarf. A story. I would like to buy the shawl, she said, gesturing to the larger piece. The one with the journey. Ibrahim nodded, a quiet warmth spreading through him. It wasn't just a sale, it felt like a moment of genuine connection, a small victory for understanding and appreciation. As he carefully wrapped the shawl, Anya asked him more questions about the origins of the fabrics, the techniques used, the meanings of other patterns she saw on his table. He answered patiently, his earlier tension completely dissolved, replaced by the simple pleasure of sharing his knowledge and the beauty of his culture with someone who was truly interested. Their conversation was low-key, calm, a stark contrast to the public drama that had unfolded just minutes before. While they spoke, Ibrahim noticed subtle shifts around them. Vendors who had been busy with customers now stole glances at his stall, their expressions unreadable but attentive. Mrs. Diaz, the elderly regular, gave him a small, encouraging nod from her spot nearby. And several people who had witnessed the insult now lingered near his stall, pretending to look at other goods, but clearly listening to Ibrahim and Anya's conversation, their initial awkwardness replaced by quiet curiosity. One older vendor, a gruff man named Bernard who sold leather goods and rarely spoke to anyone, walked slowly past Ibrahim's stall, ostensibly to check on something down the lane. As he passed, he met Ibrahim's eyes for a brief second and gave a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement, a significant gesture from Bernard. It wasn't much, but to Ibrahim, who knew the market dynamics, it felt like a quiet recognition, a sign of newfound respect from a seasoned veteran. After Anya paid and left, carefully holding the wrapped shawl as if it were treasure, Ibrahim stood for a moment, taking it all in. The market sounds returned to their usual level, but the echo of that unexpected silence, that moment of collective shock, still lingered. He felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. Maintaining that level of calm, choosing dignity over anger in the face of public humiliation, had taken its toll. His hands, which had been steady, now trembled slightly. But beneath the exhaustion was a deep sense of peace. He hadn't retaliated. He hadn't sunk to Mr. Henderson's level. He had responded with truth, with beauty, with the quiet power of his heritage and his spirit. And it had resonated. It had pierced the armor of prejudice, not by force, but by simply being authentic and strong in its own way. For the rest of the afternoon, the atmosphere around Ibrahim's stall was subtly different. People approached him with more directness, more genuine interest. Some asked about specific pieces, their questions reflecting a newfound curiosity about the stories behind them. Others simply stopped to look, their gazes lingering on the vibrant textiles, perhaps seeing them now through the lens of Ibrahim's words. There weren't immediate crowds or a sudden rush of sales. Change in the market was usually slow and incremental. But the quality of the interactions felt different. There was less haggling, more genuine conversation. People seemed more willing to listen when he spoke about where the goods came from, who made them, the meaning they held. As the day wore on, Ibrahim found himself reflecting on the incident. It had been hurtful, no doubt. Words like Mr. Henderson's could dig deep if you let them. But his response, that felt right. It felt like reclaiming something that had been attacked. It felt like standing tall not against someone, but for himself, for his culture, for the value of what he represented. He thought about all the times before this, the countless small slights, the moments of feeling invisible or misunderstood. He hadn't always responded with such grace. Sometimes, the hurt had shown on his face. Sometimes, he had simply retreated into himself. But today felt different. Today felt like a turning point. What was it about this particular insult, this particular day, that had prompted such a response? He wasn't sure. Maybe it was the public nature of it, the feeling of being exposed and challenged before so many people. Maybe it was a culmination of all the smaller moments, building up to a point where he felt compelled to respond with the full weight of his being. He knew that one incident wouldn't erase prejudice from the world, or even from this market entirely. Mr. Henderson might never change his views. But Ibrahim realized something profound in that moment. His response wasn't about changing Mr. Henderson. It was about preserving his own spirit, about demonstrating the strength that lies not in aggression, but in authenticity and dignity. And perhaps, in doing so, he had offered a different perspective, a different story, to everyone else who witnessed it. Thinking about the different perspectives, the way people see things, the judgments we sometimes make about others based on brief encounters or surface appearances, it made Ibrahim wonder. How many opportunities for connection are lost because of preconceived notions? How many stories remain untold because we are too quick to dismiss what we don't immediately understand? Perhaps this is a good moment to pause and reflect. What are your thoughts on how people judge others based on appearance or origin? Have you ever had a moment where your perspective was completely changed by someone's unexpected reaction? Share your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to read them. Ibrahim sighed softly, a thoughtful smile on his face. The market was beginning to wind down. Lights flickered on. He started the familiar process of packing up his stall, covering the textiles carefully, securing the carvings. It had been an extraordinary day, in the most unexpected way. An insult had become an opportunity. A moment of public humiliation had been transformed into a quiet demonstration of resilience and grace. And he felt a profound sense of gratitude, not for the insult itself, but for the strength he had found within himself to meet it with calm, and in doing so, to have shocked everyone, including perhaps, himself, with the quiet power of his response. The day had been challenging, but ultimately, deeply rewarding. The market lights cast long, wavering shadows as Ibrahim finished covering his stall. The scent of spices had mingled with the cooler evening air. The chaotic energy of the day was winding down, replaced by the quieter sounds of vendors packing up, gates rattling closed, and the distant hum of city traffic. Ibrahim worked with his usual meticulous care, his hands moving automatically, folding the last pieces of fabric, securing the wooden crates. Beneath the physical exhaustion, a profound sense of quiet satisfaction settled over him. It wasn't the satisfaction of having made a large profit, though sales had been decent, particularly in the latter part of the afternoon. It was the satisfaction of having faced a moment of potential humiliation with grace, and of having seen that grace resonate with others. The insult had felt like a physical blow, but his response had felt like building something beautiful in its place. As he locked the final latch on his crate, he looked around the market, now mostly deserted save for a few lingering figures. It looked the same as it always did at this hour, yet it felt different. The air held the memory of that collective pause, that moment when the market had held its breath, waiting. And the memory of his voice, steady and clear, explaining the stories woven into his goods. He hoisted the crates onto his cart, the familiar weight heavy on his arms but somehow less burdensome tonight. The walk home was usually a time for quiet contemplation, processing the day's struggles and small triumphs. Tonight, it felt like walking through the afterglow of something significant. He thought about Mr. Henderson and Peter. He held no anger towards them, only a faint sadness. Sadness that they could look at something so rich with history and human effort and see only imported dust collectors. Sadness that their own world seemed so narrow, so quick to dismiss what was different. His response hadn't been aimed at shaming them, though he suspected they felt a measure of that as they hurried away. It had been aimed at truth, at standing in his own truth and letting it speak for itself. He thought about Anya, the young student, and the way her eyes had lit up when she understood the story in the shawl. That was the real connection, the real value. Not just the transaction, but the bridging of understanding, the sharing of a piece of the world. And the quiet nods from other vendors, even Bernard, who had always seemed so distant. Those small gestures meant more than 100 sales sometimes. They were signs of belonging, of being seen and accepted, not just as a vendor, but as a person. Reaching his small apartment felt like reaching an oasis. The familiar scent of the simple meal he had prepared earlier was comforting. He ate slowly, his body tired, his mind still replaying snippets of the afternoon. He didn't dwell on the insult itself, but on the moment he chose his response, the feeling of calm clarity that had descended upon him. It felt like a lesson learned, not just for others, but for himself. A reminder that his strength lay not in matching aggression, but in embodying the quiet dignity and resilience of his spirit, the same resilience woven into the fabrics he sold, the same strength carved into the wood figures he displayed. Sleep came easily that night, a deep, restorative sleep. He woke feeling physically refreshed, but with a sense of anticipation that was slightly different from the usual day-to-day feeling. He wasn't dreading going back to the market, he was curious to see if the subtle shift from the previous afternoon would carry over. The next morning, the market was already beginning to stir when Ibrahim arrived. The air was cooler, promising a crisp day. He set up his stall with his usual care, arranging the textiles in inviting folds, positioning the wooden figures just so. He felt a quiet confidence within him, a sense of being grounded. The first interactions were telling. The vendor at the next stall, a cheerful woman who sold flowers, smiled at him with a warmth that felt a little more pronounced than usual. "Morning, Ibrahim," she said, her voice friendly. "Beautiful colors today." "Good morning," he replied, smiling back. "And your flowers are lovely as always." As customers began to trickle in, Ibrahim noticed the subtle changes. People who walked past his stall no longer averted their eyes or hurried by with a dismissive glance. Many met his gaze, offering a small nod or a polite smile. Some slowed down, their eyes scanning his goods with what felt like genuine interest rather than just idle curiosity. A woman who had witnessed the incident the day before approached his stall. She was a regular market-goer, someone he had seen many times but never spoken to. "Mr. Traoré," she said, her voice a little shy but firm. "I was here yesterday. I just wanted to say that your response was remarkable." She paused, searching for the right words. "Truly remarkable. You handled that with such grace." Ibrahim felt a warmth spread through him. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I appreciate you saying that." She smiled, a genuine, kind smile. "I saw those fabrics differently after you spoke," she confessed. "Like you said, seeing the stories in them." She didn't buy anything, but her words were a gift, a confirmation that his response had resonated, that it had made a difference. Another incident highlighted the shift. A potential customer, a stern-looking man, approached his stall and began to look at a piece of fabric, his expression critical. For a fleeting second, Ibrahim felt a familiar knot of apprehension. Would this be another encounter like yesterday? But then, another vendor, old Bernard from the leather stall, who was passing by, cleared his throat loudly and said, in his gruff voice, "Finest textiles in the market, those are. Good quality. Takes real skill." He didn't stop or look directly at Ibrahim, but the words, delivered with Bernard's usual no-nonsense tone, were clearly a form of endorsement, a public statement of respect. The stern-looking man paused, his critical expression softening slightly as he looked from Bernard to Ibrahim, and then back at the fabric with renewed interest. "Oh," he said, turning to Ibrahim. "Bernard doesn't usually speak so highly." "Tell me about this piece, then." Ibrahim smiled, genuinely this time, his earlier apprehension completely gone. He began to tell the story of the fabric, the village where it was made, the meaning of its patterns, his voice calm and engaging. The man listened intently, no longer looking critical, but curious and receptive. He ended up buying not just that piece, but another as well, asking questions and expressing genuine interest throughout the transaction. It wasn't just individual interactions. There was a collective shift in the atmosphere around Ibrahim's stall. It felt more welcoming, more open. Other vendors seemed more inclined to chat with him, share a joke, or simply acknowledge him with a friendly nod. The unspoken barriers that had sometimes existed seemed to have lessened, if not disappeared entirely. Ibrahim realized that Mr. Henderson's insult, intended to push him away, had inadvertently pulled him closer to the heart of the market community. By choosing dignity over despair, by responding with the richness of his culture and the quiet strength of his character, he had shown everyone a different side of himself, a side that resonated with the shared human experience of struggle, resilience, and the search for meaning and belonging. The shock wasn't just in the calmness of his response, it was in the unexpected power it held to connect and transform perceptions. His stall was no longer just a place selling goods, it was becoming a place known for the quiet dignity of the man who stood behind it. The days that followed the incident with Mr. Henderson continued to reinforce the subtle but significant shift in Ibrahim's market life. It wasn't a dramatic overnight change, but a steady current of increased respect and connection. Customers approached him with more openness, engaging in conversations that went beyond simple transactions. They asked about the origins of the fabrics, the meanings of the symbols, sometimes sharing small stories of their own lives or travels. Ibrahim, in turn, felt more comfortable sharing the rich history and cultural significance behind his goods, his initial reservation replaced by a quiet confidence. He found himself chatting more easily with the other vendors too. Old Bernard would occasionally stop by, not just to pass by, but to make a dry comment about the weather or the day's business, a clear sign of acceptance. Maria, the flower vendor, would share gossip about market events or offer him a spare flower at the end of the day. There was a sense of camaraderie that had been missing before, a feeling of being part of the fabric of the market community rather than just an observer on its fringes. The impact of that single, calm response had rippled outwards in unexpected ways. It had not only diffused a moment of public aggression but had also served as an unintentional demonstration of character that resonated deeply with those who witnessed it. People remembered the dignity, the quiet strength, the unexpected beauty in his words. They remembered the contrast between the loud, dismissive insult and the soft, resonant reply. Ibrahim understood that not every act of prejudice could be met with such a universally positive outcome. He knew that the world was still full of challenges, of misunderstandings, of people who might never see past their own biases. But this experience had given him something invaluable, a reaffirmation of his own inner strength and the power of choosing how to respond, regardless of how others behave. It had shown him that maintaining his dignity and authenticity was not a passive act, but a powerful one. Sometimes, late in the afternoon when the market was quieter, he would see someone pause near his stall, a person who had been there that day, their eyes resting on the textiles with a thoughtful expression. They might not buy anything, might not even speak, but there was a silent acknowledgement, a shared memory of that moment when the usual noise of the market was replaced by a stillness, and a quiet voice spoke of history, beauty, and resilience. He still worked hard, long hours under the sun and the market lights. The physical demands of the job hadn't changed. There were still slow days, still moments of fatigue or minor frustration. But the underlying feeling had shifted. He no longer felt quite so much like an outsider. He was Ibrahim, the vendor with the beautiful fabrics and the quiet strength, a man who carried stories and shared them with those willing to listen. One afternoon, several weeks after the incident, as Ibrahim was carefully arranging a new batch of fabrics, he looked up to see Anya, the young student who had bought the journey shawl, approaching his stall again. She was smiling, a bright, friendly smile. "Hello, Mr. Traoré," she said. I just wanted to show you something. She reached into her bag and pulled out the shawl she had bought. It was draped loosely around her shoulders, the vibrant colors a striking contrast to her simple everyday clothes. It's become my favorite, she said softly, running her hand over the fabric. I wear it often. And every time I do, I think about what you said. About the story of the journey. It helps me remember my grandmother. And it helps me feel connected. Ibrahim's heart swelled. This was more than just a satisfied customer. This was a genuine connection, a piece of his heritage finding a new home, a new meaning, a new story interwoven with someone else's life. That is beautiful to hear, Anya, he said, his voice filled with genuine emotion. That is the true purpose of these pieces. To carry the stories forward. She nodded, still smiling. Yes. And you sharing the stories, that makes all the difference. She paused, looking around the market. I remember that day, she said quietly. When that man was so unkind. I was so angry for you. Ibrahim offered her a gentle smile. Yes, he said simply. That was a difficult moment. But the way you responded, she continued, her voice filled with admiration. It wasn't just about the fabrics anymore. It was about everything. About not letting someone else's meanness take away your peace. It was a really powerful thing to see. He nodded slowly. Sometimes, he said, looking out at the bustling market, the most powerful response is not the loudest one, but the one that comes from a place of quiet strength and truth. Anya smiled, a thoughtful look on her face. Thank you for that lesson, Mr. Traoré. And thank you again for this beautiful shawl. It means a lot to me. As she walked away, the vibrant shawl flowing behind her like a banner, Ibrahim felt a profound sense of purpose. His stall was more than just a business. It was a bridge, a place where stories were shared, where understanding could blossom, where quiet strength could shine brighter than any public insult. The insult had been a test, and he had passed it not with defiance, but with grace. And in doing so, he hadn't just shocked everyone, he had quietly, beautifully, changed his world within the market. The story of Ibrahim Traoré's calm response spread through the market, becoming a quiet legend. It was a reminder that true strength often lies not in volume or aggression, but in dignity, resilience, and the unwavering power of one's own truth. And in that vibrant, chaotic marketplace, it was a story that reminded everyone of the unexpected places where you can find beauty, history, and the most profound lessons in humanity. If you found Ibrahim's story inspiring, think about a time you saw someone respond to negativity with unexpected calm or grace. What happened? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue the conversation about the power of dignity. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that explore human resilience, unexpected moments of kindness, and the quiet ways people make a difference in the world.